And then I'll give you a free
It just went on.
Okay. Let's go text, yeah.
Morning. How are we doing today?
How are you?
Good.
Yeah, but-
Oh, it's Albany.
yeah.
Thanks.
I just want to give you both a heads up that we'll probably stream this on our Facebook page, just to let you guys know.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay.
Good morning. How's everybody doing today?
We're good. How are you guys?
Good. So the mayor and I wanted to provide a briefing on where the city of Albany ended 2024 with public safety initiatives and talk briefly about some of the upcoming 2025 goals, challenges, and initiatives that we have. We're going to start by reviewing our 2024 data and use our 2023 data to compare and show you where we wound up, understand some of the recent history. I want to note 2024 was certainly a challenging year when it comes to many perspectives, including staffing, as we've talked about a lot, and we'll continue to face that, but we'll also continue to face that head on. We've got a new list of candidates that we're going through. We look forward to hiring as many as possible and getting a new class in here within the upcoming months. We're also going to be announcing that we have a new test that we're going to be giving in April. We're just finishing up the civil service announcement. Once we get that announcement out, we'll be doing heavy recruiting and certainly getting that out in all of our different media forums, and our officers will be going out into the community. We'll be asking our community partners for a lot of help on that. I tell a lot of people, I'm taking a side note here. I tell a lot of people when I came on as a police officer in 1994, I just started taking the police test after I got out of college in 1992, and there used to be 1,500 people that took the police test. We get about 200 people that take the test now. This is a great job, and I would implore anybody that's interested in serving the public good and serving their community to take this test. This is a noble job. This is a job you can really give back to your community, and please look into it. There is nothing better than serving your community as a police officer, and I would really ask that people look into their heart and understand that this is a great opportunity for folks. But I'll get back to our crime. So we saw an overall decrease of 12% overall in Part 1 crimes from 2023 and 2024. This is ultimately a testament to the dedication of the women and men of the Albany Police Department and the partnerships that exist with our fellow law enforcement partners, our community partners, and the citizens at large. It's also important to continue to stress that public safety is a partnership that goes beyond the police and involves a number of different aspects, but including enforcement, education, deterrence, and education. Before I get into stats, do you want to say anything, Matt?
Well, I just want to say that this department worked incredibly hard in 2024 to continue to drive down crime in the city of Albany. We experienced many of the challenges that cities across the country experienced as a result of COVID. This department, even with the challenges that it has had with staffing, took that challenge head on and has worked tremendously hard to ensure that we are solving crimes, getting dangerous people off the streets, and the numbers that you're going to see, I think, bear out what that hard work has yielded for our residents and for our broader community.
I just want to note that picture, you know, we're going to talk about crime statistics, but our officers do things that go way beyond enforcing laws. You know, here you have officers delivering food on a holiday to folks that are in need. So our officers do things that really are embedded in our community. So when we talk about Part 1 crime, we usually talk about breaking that between property crime and violent crime. Property crime are things like burglary, people entering into buildings, whether it's a residence or a business, larcenies, people stealing things, motor vehicle theft. So as you'll see, our property crime was down overall, down 12% when it comes to burglary, down 13% when it comes to larceny, a 28% reduction in motor vehicle theft, and a 15% reduction overall. I want to touch on two different things. So one is larcenies. So there has been a ton of media coverage, a ton of folks talking about things like larcenies, and people often talk about retail theft. So we have done a lot in this city to address retail theft, and we will continue to do a lot. I know people get frustrated when they have to go to the store and ask for people to unlock the shelf where they get their toothpaste or they get their shaving cream. And when you really think about retail theft, there's really two different types of retail theft. There's retail theft that's organized and people really stealing for a profit. And then there's retail theft that's driven by addiction, mental health, and poverty. And I really want to break those two things out because those are two very different issues. And those are two very different issues that we have to address in very specific different strategies. And we are taking those two things on very differently, but also very coordinated. So when it comes to organized retail theft, we have a very big partnership with our other law enforcement partners. That includes both from a policing end, the Albany Police, State Police, the District Attorney's Office. It includes the business community where we're working with our big box, the big box stores, the grocery stores, to really focus on repeat offenders that are ultimately going to multiple stores, ultimately stealing from stores and clearly doing it for profit, clearly doing it to ultimately target those stores, steal, resell items, and do it for a profit. And I mean, they're doing it to victimize stores, to drive up, and they're ultimately driving up a lot of the costs and ultimately creating a lot of the issues that you see. So that coordination is enabling us to really focus on those repeat offenders and hold them accountable in the court of law. So ensuring that we're making arrests. We have the Crime Analysis Center, which sits downstairs. We're able to work with the state and the Crime Analysis Center to help identify a lot of those folks and ultimately make arrests, prosecute, and hold those people accountable. At the same time, we're also identifying folks that may be committing offenses due to unmet behavioral health issues or poverty. Folks that the criminal legal system is not going to be able to ultimately help out by continuing to arrest those folks, and people that we know that that's not going to help. We know that through all kinds of data, through all kinds of years of experience, we know that that's not going to help. So we will continue to utilize things like law enforcement assisted diversion, like some of the treatment courts, to get those folks the services they need to ensure that they don't continue to come through the doors of the criminal legal system, but instead get the services they need so they can get services and treatment rather than jail. So we will continue to look at those two groups of people in a much different way. And as you see, our larceny numbers continue to go down. Motor vehicle theft, you know, we don't have a lot of organized rings here in the city of Albany or in the capital region that are stealing vehicles. Not to say that we never do, but we rarely do. Motor vehicle theft is often driven by crimes of opportunity. So one of the things that under Chief Hawkins' leadership last year was an education and then ultimately enforcement strategy that was really meant for recognizing that there are folks, everybody's done it, start their car, leave their car unattended, walk away, And next thing you know, there's a crime of opportunity where somebody steals that car. It's obviously in the middle of winter. It's very cold here in Albany at times, and people warm their car up. That leads to folks stealing a car. Sometimes that car winds up being used in another offense. That winds up creating many, many problems for us. So that strategy helped lead to a 28% reduction in motor vehicle theft from 372 cars to 267. When we talk about statistics can go a lot of different ways, but we know motor vehicle theft is something that gets reported. When somebody's car is stolen, they call 911. We know that's a real number. So I ask and implore people to not start their car and leave their keys in the car and walk away. That is a very preventable crime. That is something that we can all take part in and ensure that we don't have cars stolen. So as it's cold out, as it's winter, or even when it gets to be summer and you want to cool your car down, help us out, help yourselves out. It's also an insurance issue for you, so you do not want to do that. So that is one way that folks can continue to do that. So gun crime. Obviously, when it comes to the safety of our residents, the safety of our community, gun crime is a very significant issue that we want to make sure that we address. So when it comes to 2024, we had a significant reduction in gun crime. Now I say that, and I know you look at the amount of people that our shootings went from 57 to 55. So that's a 4% reduction. That might not seem significant, but I'm going to point to confirmed shots fired. So from the moment we get a call for shots fired, the women and men in this department do an outstanding job of really starting investigations into all of these calls, all the way through to our detective office of treating anytime we get a call for shots fired as if someone has been shot or someone has been killed. Let me just state that anytime a gun is shot in this city, first of all, one time is too many. Second of all, that means somebody could get killed, and we want to make sure that that does not happen. It's unacceptable for anybody to fire a weapon in this city. So when I look at our numbers, I look at that number for confirmed shots fired, because we investigate any call, whether it's anytime somebody calls and says, I think I heard a shot fired, it could be fireworks. But we take any of those calls extremely seriously, and we make sure that we investigate those calls all the way through to try to confirm whether or not shots were fired. And if shots were fired, we then take all of the steps necessary to try to find out who in fact fired that gun and ultimately bring that call to justice, try to figure out who did that so we can ultimately take the appropriate steps. But you'll see there was an 18% decrease from 152 to 124. I will also note what's not up there is the 5-year average. Over 5 years, that confirmed shots fired is actually 193. So we have had a considerable decrease in the number of confirmed shots fired over the past 5 years. I will also note that gun recoveries has gone up from 138 to 180. So there's also a continued level of excellent investigative work from our detective office to get guns off the street. And there's also continued needed work to be done to keep guns off of our street. So I also implore the community that if you see somebody with a gun, if you have a family member that has a gun, please get that gun off the street. Call us. Let's get that gun off the street. We do not need more guns on our streets. And we know that there are more ways for people to have guns. It is unbelievable to me, should be unbelievable to everybody, and I would implore people to do something more about this, that somebody can buy a printer and ultimately print a gun, ghost gun situation that we have. It's a horrible name for it, but somebody can ultimately make a gun at home and ultimately order the right parts for that gun and ultimately now have a gun without having to ever leave their house to ultimately have a weapon that can kill somebody. That's unacceptable. As a society, we need to do more about that. And at the end of the day, we continue to do more about that. So when it comes to shootings continue to go down. When it comes to gun recoveries, those recoveries continue to go up.
Chief, that 193 number you just referenced in terms of the 5-year, that's from, what was 193? Is that?
So our 5-year average of confirmed shots fired is 193.
Okay.
So our confirmed shots fired number for 2024 was 124. So from 2023 to 2024 was an 18% decrease. Math was not my strong point. So whatever the 193 to 124 is, it was obviously much more significant when it comes to a 5-year decrease.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So calls for service. So calls for service was about a 3% difference. What I really want to focus on here is that as we look at calls for service, obviously we respond to anything that somebody calls us for. There are a number of different categories of what we respond to, but I want to just take a moment to note that we started an online reporting system, mainly for things like larcenies in which it's not an active larceny. So somebody finds that something was stolen out of their car overnight, they want to report that to us. Somebody's been harassed by somebody, they know who that person is, they want to report that to us. Somebody's got an issue with issuing bad checks, crimes that are not in progress. We started that a little bit over a year ago, and ultimately we've had about 1,141 reports that have been ultimately given to us online. That helps decrease the number of calls for service that our officers actively go on. That helps us be more proactive in the neighborhood, ultimately getting to know our community and ultimately being able to do more work. I want to assure people of something. I realize this is somewhat new. It's not new completely to policing. This is something that we need to go to and we know we need to go to. I wish I could tell you that, we could send a police officer to every call for service and we could see you person to person. But at the end of the day, this helps make things more efficient for us on our end and for you on your end, for the community. When you make a report online, the same investigative steps are going to be taken as if an officer goes to your house and takes a report. Our investigators are going to receive the report, and our investigators are ultimately going to follow up with you and ultimately going to investigate that, and you're going to get the same service you would as if a police officer comes to your report. So I kind of implore folks to continue to use that, to explore it. We're going to continue to expand it. We think it's really important. We're in the 21st century now. When I used to order a pizza, I'd pick up the phone, I'd call, I'd speak to somebody, and I'd do it. Now we look at our phone, we use the app, and we do it. And I realize that that might seem like I'm comparing apples to oranges, but I'm really not. At the end of the day, it's about effectiveness and efficiency. And I'm promising you that you're going to get the same service. In fact, you're probably going to get better service doing this because it's going to allow us to be able to prioritize what we respond to. And it's going to allow us to be able to have the officer that's assigned to your neighborhood to also be free in your neighborhood, to be more proactive and really be able to patrol the neighborhood, get to know folks, and not be at your house to ultimately be taking a report that it can get done in a more efficient, effective way online. It's just a much better way to do things. So violent crime. So violent crime is definitely an area that obviously everybody is always concerned about. So when it comes to Part 1 crime, like I said, property crime, violent crime. Violent crime is down overall 2%. Aggravated assault, 4%, robbery, 6%, and homicides are down 35%. So we have 13 homicides in 2024 compared to 20 homicides in 2023. I want to note that 12 of those 13 homicides, there have been arrests. One case is still openly active. We're still ultimately making headway on that. And I want to note that that's in 2024. We've made 12 of 13. I know the mayor receives these calls. I get these calls as well, as our detectives do. I want to make sure that families of loved ones that have lost loved ones to homicides, we don't forget about you. Whether you had a loved one that was taken from us in 2024 and 2023, 2022, or any other year. Our detectives, I don't look at a homicide as a cold case. I know that's a term that people like to use. But our detectives continue to have any homicide that's happened in this city as an active case, and they continue to follow up on those cases. So we have not forgotten about you. So even though I want to say that, we've solved 12 out of those 13 from last year and successfully brought those cases to justice, we will continue to try to successfully bring all those other cases to justice. So I don't want this message to be to anyone else who's lost a loved one that great, in 2024, you were able to close those cases, but what about my loved one? We will continue to work on all of those other cases diligently. And the work that the men and women of our detective division continue to do, whether it be by working with victims' families, with witnesses, or with the technology that we have to solve these cases, never ceases to amaze me, and they will continue to do that work. But I just want to make sure people know that, folks are not forgotten, nor will we ever forget folks. I also want to talk a little bit about the rape situation. So rape is a category that we did have an increase. And there are a couple of reasons for that increase. One is in 2024, there was a legal change to the definition of rape when it comes to the New York State penal law. So we see this every couple of years. The state legislature changes the definition, most of the time for the better. And I would certainly argue that this year it was for the better. The way that the categories used to be, there was a very specific definition of rape. I'm not going to get into everything, but they basically took a couple of different statutes and put them into the rape definition and basically made the statute better by combining a few different statutes. So that corrected some of the issues around statutes that were not considered rape, but were serious sexual offenses, but were not categorized under the rape category for Part 1 crimes. Obviously, they were still extremely significant offenses. They just weren't considered Part 1 crimes. They should have been, and they now are. Our other significant issue is that rape is usually underreported. Not usually, it's always underreported for a number of reasons. We want to make sure that our survivors and victims of sexual assault always feel comfortable coming to us and reporting that. So I always want to make sure that people that were victims of sexual assault feel comfortable coming forward to the Albany Police Department and report those cases to us so we can bring people to justice and we can bring whatever closure we possibly could to a victim of these heinous offenses. So we've been doing a lot over the past number of years to try to build relationships with some of our most vulnerable people. We are a city that has a number of residential homes in our city, many for young adults and youth. And many of those young adults and youth wind up eloping from those facilities at different times. And those kids, they're traumatized when they come into those facilities, when they come into those residential homes. And, when we talk about kids that wind up being trafficked, we think about the traditional trafficking definition. We think about somebody that's going to be taken in by someone who's going to ultimately put them out on the street and use them as prostitutes. Our kids often wind up having somebody who takes that kid in and violates that kid in return for shelter and food and clothing. And we've had some really great work out of our Children and Family Services unit and the relationships that they built with the group homes to really try to get the trust of the youth that when they return to the facility or when we find that kid, we're able to ultimately build the trust with that kid to be able to tell us what happened so we can take that predator off the street. One of our detectives, Nicole Carrazzo, has done a phenomenal job of not only building the relationship with the group homes, but also being able to talk to those kids when they come back through our door and be able to get the trust of the kid to tell us what happened so we can go find that predator and get them off the street so that they don't do this to any other kids. Because if they do it to one kid, they're going to do it to another kid. So I just want to mention there's a couple of different arrests that have been made. So on March 30th of 2024, we had a 15-year-old that was the victim from a 44-year-old male, Juan Linares, of our city, who provided that young girl with a narcotic, cocaine and alcohol, and then forcibly sexually assaulted her. We ultimately were able to arrest him in April. He was successfully prosecuted and sentenced to 4 years and 10 years post-release, 4 years imprisonment and 10 years post-release. He's also now going to have to register as a sex offender. We then in April had a sexual assault reported to us, April 30th. Again, another 15-year-old female reported that 29-year-old James Lassonde forcibly sexually assaulted her. He was arrested in May 15th of 2024. He was charged with rape first and rape third, and he was successfully prosecuted and sentenced to 4 years imprisonment, 10 years post-release. Also will be registering as a sex offender. And then the last case is in June 23rd, a 14-year-old female reported that a 45-year-old Aldian Chandler forcibly sexually assaulted her. He was arrested in November, charged with criminal sex act in the first, criminal sex act in the second, and he was prosecuted and sentenced to 6 months in jail and 10 years post-release and registered as a sex offender. All these cases were the result of Detective Carrazzo and her work in these cases. These are horrific cases. These are the cases that our vulnerable youth wind up facing. And these are cases that we will continue to ultimately ensure that we bring to justice and that we do everything we can to stop before they happen. It's also a reason why we will be taking part in the upcoming Capital Region Missing Child Rescue Operation. So the Missing Person Clearinghouse, which is run out of New York State Department of Criminal Justice Services, the Missing Person Clearinghouse and the National Child Protection Task Force, they ran a pilot program in Buffalo at the end of last year, where they focused on some of the most significant runaways in Buffalo, where they realized that there are, when we look at our numbers, when we look at our crime stats, we know that a lot of our offenders are repeat offenders. When we look at our runaways, if we think about traumatized kids, many of our kids are sometimes repeat runaways. So we know that if we can focus on some of the kids who wind up running away multiple times, we know that if we can make sure that we get them before they're traumatized on the street, get them back, and ultimately get them the services they need and try to figure out a better plan for them, figure out if where they are might not be the right place for them, get them placed in a better residential facility, get them better connection to services, get them a better safety plan. So we'll be taking part in that. That'll be coming up in March. We really appreciate the Missing Person Clearinghouse wanting to come to Albany and do this. It's going to have a ton of partners. There'll be much more on that later on. I don't want to get too far ahead of the state in that announcement. But we have to continue to ultimately make sure that we're serving the most vulnerable in the city and that we're really ensuring that we don't want them victimized in the first place, but we also don't want people re-victimized. So this kind of talks to what I was just talking about. We've had an increase when it comes to those cases, much because of the hard work of detectives like Detective Carrazza. 70% increase in rape arrests, a 41% increase in Part 2 sex offense arrests, some of the underlying offenses, and then a 49% overall increase. And I want to make sure we put up some of the resources for folks that are victims of sexual assault. I'm going to leave that there for a minute for you guys. So before I finish up, just a few other things of note. In 2024, we received the Albany Police reaccreditation from New York State Department of Criminal Justice Services. That's a credit to our training and policy unit. Lieutenant Mahar and Sergeant Sarah did amazing work getting that together. That's important for us to be accredited as an agency. That shows that we have the highest levels of standard and policy. In line with that, when it comes to training and policy and how we work with our officers, in 2014, we started an initiative in the Albany Police Department called Safeguarding Children of Incarcerated Parents. That was in coordination with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, and the Osborne Association. It's an initiative where we recognize that our officers are often in situations where when we respond to calls, there are youth on the scene, and we make sure that our officers recognize that when their youth are on the scene, that we handle that with due diligence and extra care, and that we respond appropriately. You know, I tell people often, I was 23 years old when I became a police officer. We talk about the brain development. Our brain development, my wife will tell you my brain is still developing, but at the end of the day, you know, the brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25, 27 years old. So we're dealing with kids that might react in a certain way. You know, if I go to a call for domestic violence and I need to arrest the offender and there's a 14 or a 15-year-old on the scene, or let's say there's a 5-year-old on the scene, I may want to make sure I act in a certain way as an officer. I don't want to put handcuffs on somebody in front of their child if I don't have to. So the safeguarding initiative was something that we worked with those groups to really be able to not only have a policy in place, but training in place, so our officers understood that they could do everything they could to really make sure that we took all the right steps to really treat those cases appropriately. So that way, if I had that case, I could say to the person, hey, listen, let's go talk outside so we can get away from your child and we can make sure this doesn't happen in front of your child. And I can do that in a safe manner and in a way that doesn't traumatize your child. So we started doing that in 2014. We were one of the leaders, not just in the state, but we were one of the leaders in the country. It took until 2024, a number of other agencies in the state started to do that, including the city of Buffalo. But it was just recently in 2024 that the governor just signed into legislation that all police agencies in the state will now have to do that. That's actually part of the accreditation program. And that will actually be, there are some police departments that aren't accredited in the state, that every police agency will do that. That also led to us doing the Handle with Care program. So the Handle with Care program is an initiative where if we wind up in a situation where there's potential trauma or an incident where we're aware of with a child, we notify the school district. The school district then knows that, hey, Brendan was present last night when there was an incident at home. Now the teachers know that Brendan might be coming to school tomorrow. There might be an issue with him in the classroom. We know enough that we can ultimately deal with him with a little more care today, a little more understanding that something happened in the household last night. So that way we can be on the lookout to make sure that he is physically, mentally, he's emotionally okay. And if he's not, we can have the right people in our school deal with that situation, have the right professionals deal with that. So that kind of came off of that. We've also done a number of other trainings, including things like policing the teen brain, including things like adverse childhood experiences, because we know about things like ACEs and what that means for folks later on in life. So I'm really proud of that, and I'm really proud of the fact that that's now state legislation, and now other police agencies are going to be doing that. And then finally, for goals, we know that we have to deal with staffing. We have a lot of plans in place that we want to do. Health and wellness of our officers is really important. So we're going to be continuing to look at the health and wellness of our officers. I'm going to be looking to see if we can do something about actually having a health and wellness coordinator. I'm looking at some of the different things that we have when it comes to our staffing from a command level detail. And I'm just looking for, we don't often report on, I brought too many papers, when we don't often talk about our internal statistics when it comes to what's been happening internally and how that health and wellness affects it. If I can find it, I'll tell you. But when it comes to, complaints, when it comes to our car crashes, when it comes to use of force, staffing and health and wellness, that can all correlate to many of those internal issues. So when we look at things like use of force, in 2023, we had 328 use of force incidents. So that could be anything from physical force to the use of the taser to anything to use of a handgun. In 2024, that went down to 257. In 2023, we had 39 vehicle crashes. In 2024, that went to 46. That says to me that I need to continue to make sure that we're not causing officers to work too many hours, that we're paying attention to what's happening with them. Complaint-wise, we went down from 57 in 2023 to 54 in 2024. And then the last thing, officer injury. Again, things we need to keep an eye on for officers, the calls they're responding to, how many hours they're working. In 2023, we had 56 officers injured. In 2024, we had 60. So things that we need to keep an eye on internally and make sure that the health and wellness of our officers is there.
Thank you. So this was a bit of a deeper dive because we have the year-end data, and as you all know, the declines that we saw between 23 and 24 followed from significant declines in virtually every one of those categories from 22 to 23. And so we continue to be moving in the right direction. We think that with respect to rapes, that, as the chief said, part of it is that the definition is now broader, and so it is pulling in more cases, and that we have throughout this year been laser focused on where we are seeing victims, and that is young vulnerable people who come to the city of Albany from all over New York State to benefit from the services that are available in the residential treatment facilities that are located here. Those residential treatment facilities are concentrated in the city of Albany, and we know that and work with those entities on a regular basis for those who abscond from, these are not lockdown facilities, but who leave these facilities and who are preyed upon by people who, as you heard from the arrests that have been made, we seek to arrest and bring to justice. But being able to work with the state on lifting that up and bringing more resources to bear on that, we think is critically important. And I think that the other piece of this, and the chief touched on it a little bit with respect to lead and drug court, but we have a mental health crisis in this country, and Albany is not immune. And so we continue to see across all of these areas where we continue to focus on crime and victims, that it is often people with serious mental health issues, with serious substance use disorders, who are victims of crimes and who also are in need of services. And they also are a huge factor in the amount of time that our officers spend responding to calls. And so we need to ensure that in addition to the work that we're doing to deal with violent crime, that we advocate within healthcare, within mental health care. This is not something that the police alone can do, and that will be a theme for the rest of this administration throughout 2025, is focusing on the mental health services that are truly needed to help individuals who are, as I said, vulnerable to be victims of crime, but also oftentimes committing crimes, creating quality of life issues because they do not have access to and have not received the treatment that they need. So I want to commend this department. This is the result of incredibly hard work on the part of the men and women of this police department, notwithstanding the challenges that we have with staffing. They are making our city safer. They are arresting people who are perpetrating horrific crimes in our city, and they are also working to ensure that we are lifting up our youth, helping those in our community who are struggling, and working to ensure that our entire community feels as though they are part of creating safety in their community, in their neighborhoods, because we must work on this all together. Any questions?
On topic, please.
So on the matter of public safety, to whoever feels best to address it, there was recently a significant bust of 3D printed guns. Thoughts on that reaction, and also expectation of how many more of these guns might be found in the city?
So I want to be respectful to the fact that that was not our investigation. That was the state police investigation. And I don't want to comment too much on another agency's investigation. But I mean, that's why I made the point of, the fact that people can have a 3D printer that can make a handgun. Something needs to be done about that. I mean, to me, like, that's insane that someone can buy a piece of equipment that can make a gun. Something needs to be done about that. I don't understand how in the world, as a country, we can allow that to happen. I don't know what the intent was for someone to have that many guns in the first place, but I certainly don't understand how we can allow that to happen. It makes zero sense to me. It makes zero sense to me that we can have on social media platforms videos that show people how to make, how to go from having a semi-automatic gun to make it automatic. How our social media, the people that run the social media platforms can't be held responsible to make sure, and I don't care if somebody wants to call me out for censorship, go ahead, but how they can't have those things taken down, I don't know. It makes zero sense to me. Throw the Second Amendment out the window as far as I'm concerned when it comes to that. That is not a Second Amendment issue. That is a public safety issue.
So would you feel, I understand that some of those 3D printers, there's a function of the software that essentially blocks them from printing certain designs. Do you think it's a 3D printer problem, like ban the printers, ban the designs? Like, what do you think could be done?
There's an awful lot of people that are a lot smarter than I am that I'm sure can figure out a way to make sure that that design cannot be printed.
So I will say that, I am part of Everytown for Gun Safety, Mayors Against Illegal Guns. It seems pretty ludicrous that we have to call ourselves that. It seems like everyone should be against illegal guns. But, when the provider of the polymer for one of the more robust ghost guns was sued, we saw a huge decline in the number of those types of guns that were being manufactured and sold. I think holding the gun manufacturers responsible is something that is critically important. That's a policy issue. It's not a police issue. But, when we were struggling, and we still are struggling, we still have far too many shots fired in this city. But when people were coming to me and saying, and asking me what I was going to do about gun violence in the city of Albany, I would say, don't talk to me about stopping gun violence without talking to me about common sense gun control. And we are far from being there. We need to do more of it. We know that guns that have less than a year from time to crime are trafficked guns, right? The average gun that's used in a crime within a year, the individual who first purchased that gun purchased 15 guns. That's gun trafficking, right? So we have to deal with the supply side because it is out of control. Police often also talk about dealing with the demand side. How do you prevent somebody from picking up a gun? But something happened during the pandemic that was I think, a major shift in how people think. And we live in a country where people believe that they need to carry a gun, where we have school districts in other states saying that teachers need to be armed. So this is a culture shift that has happened in this country. And that's the conversation that we need to have. And we need to be able to have that conversation in a civil way. But this is a shift that has occurred in the mentality and in the culture of having guns, be they legal or illegal. Unfortunately, many of them in our community are illegal. And that is a broader conversation that we need to have. You know, that when everyone has a gun, we are less safe. And the data shows us that.
So talking specifically about the numbers, if we were to try and round up every one of these ghost guns, do you have an estimate on, Chief, Mayor, how many you think might be currently hiding in the city somewhere at this point?
Question for you about the new test in April. What does that look like?
What does the test look like?
Yeah, I know it's changing. Like, what changes are going to happen?
So we are, the written test will still be the same. We are in the process of working through some issues. The reason why it's not posted right now is we're working with our civil service folks on the physical requirements and how often we can get somebody to be able to be retested on the physical part. We are also going to be providing the test twice this year rather than traditional one time a year. And people are going to be eligible to be able to take the test twice, the written test, rather than only once a year. And that's going to be important because it's going to allow us to get through multiple lists rather than only one list within a year. So much of the written test, much of the background, much of what people will need to be able to do to be qualified will all be very similar. However, they're going to be able to take the written test more than once in a year. We're going to be able to canvass more than one list in a year, which is going to enable us to step up our recruiting efforts and step up the number of classes that we can put in a given year.
Chief, 91 rapes in 2024, how many arrests in those cases? Sorry, was that one of the slides?
It was.
You had it. Is that a number that, I mean, you said you have arrests in 12 out of 13 homicides, but only 55 out of 90. I mean, is there room for improvement there? How would you address that?
So homicides are challenging. Sexual assaults are extremely challenging. They are the most challenging cases that exist. They're the most challenging cases to get victims and survivors to come forward and report, and they are very challenging cases to investigate and effect arrests on. And there are a number of reasons for that. They're not because they're stranger offenses. The majority of offenses are people that are known to others. Most of those are legal issues. Many of those are issues that happen in court. Many times we will actually look to indict a case, and sometimes we have issues when it comes to indicting cases. And has nothing to do with being the victim's fault. It has to do with a system issue and just the complexity of those cases.
For the mayor, as you know, a new administration is taking over in a week at the federal level. As a sanctuary city, considering some of the proposed deportation plan, would you ever use the police department to stop federal authorities from deporting individuals who have settled here?
The sanctuary city status of Albany is built upon the policy that has been recommended by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is that we don't inquire as to your status if you are a victim of a crime. We are not a federal agency that goes out and looks to arrest people who are not documented. We're not paid to do that. We, I think, hear enough from our residents about the need for more resources and the challenges of our resources enforcing the work that we are mandated to enforce and working within our communities to deal with issues that people have. And so it would really be, there's a lot of case law out there, not to bore you with it, but it would be very difficult, and it's been found unconstitutional for the federal government to mandate that local law enforcement enforce and act as federal agents. And so a lot of that is speculation right now, and we'll have to see what happens. But certainly, if federal agents have a reason to deport a person who is not legally in this country, that is their jurisdiction, and that is their decision, and that is a legal process that exists within our federal government. And so, that it's not about, a sanctuary city is not about interfering with federal law enforcement in doing their job. It's never what a sanctuary city has meant.
Two off topics. And then, do you have an update for us on the officer-involved shooting with Officer Blossom, I believe it was?
Yeah, we're still finishing up our investigation, but certainly all that appears is that Officer Blossom acted appropriately. I am, again, very thankful that everyone is okay from that. I still want to finish that investigation up, but, from all video I've seen, from every interview that I've reviewed, Officer Blossom acted appropriately. The officers attempted to speak with the defendant and get him to ultimately de-escalate and turn himself in, and he ultimately escalated that situation, pretended that he had a gun on him. He ultimately did have a loaded gun that was in the house at the time, but we need to finish our investigation.
Do you anticipate releasing more body camera footage or other video from that incident?
Probably once the investigation is over.
Was there ever, were there mental health mediators there? Or, I know there's a social worker component you're implementing. Was that ever part of the conversation, as this was I guess it was called in as a domestic?
So, that's a good question. And it's a good question based on the fact that it often comes up about what people's roles are. Based on that circumstance, that would have not been an appropriate circumstance for anybody in an unarmed capacity to be involved in that. Whenever it comes to unarmed mental health workers to be involved in speaking with somebody, it is in speaking with somebody when it is an unarmed situation. In this case, all of the information, getting into the investigation when I said I was not going to, it was when speaking to an individual who all indications were that he was armed and that he was willing and actively attempting to use a handgun on individuals and harm them. So it would not have been appropriate to use anyone other than the police in that response.
While we're talking about these officer-involved issues, Jonathan Dampier and the interaction there a few months ago, will any more body cam video be released of that? I know at the time They said there was more, I wasn't just sure when, if there would be released.
I'll get back to you. I'll have to review that.
What about the officer who pulled a gun on, is it school campus, I believe? Towards a student, was it, I believe? Can you give us an update on that?
Sure. I mean, that officer saved people from being harmed. There was students that got into an altercation, into a fight. There was a student, a 17-year-old, that pulled out a knife. He raised that knife up to the level of his chest as the officer walked by him. That officer, I think people, and I'm not saying you, but there are people sometimes that believe when an officer ultimately is forced to pull out his duty weapon, that there's some kind of escalation. In this case, from what I've reviewed, that officer did ultimately draw his duty weapon. He drew his duty weapon and actually de-escalated the situation. Thankfully, that young man complied and did ultimately drop that knife. It was in a very narrow hallway. There were other students not in line of that officer, but there were other students that were in certainly near contact of where that young man was with that knife. There was staff close by, and the officer himself who was at risk. And ultimately, he de-escalated that situation, calmed it down, and ultimately disarmed that young man and caused anybody from being injured.
What was the fight about for him to draw a knife? What was the altercation between students?
Last question.
Not sure if you touched on this already, and I know this is a state police investigation. Do you have any reaction to that man in Albany that was arrested for manufacturing ghost guns from his home?
So you can hit rewind. I'm just kidding. So we did talk about it, but no, my reaction is it's obviously their investigation. I can't talk much about their investigation itself, but my reaction is that there should never be equipment that's available to anybody in the general public that can make those kind of weapons and be readily available. That's pathetic.
Is there anything more you can offer on the dog mauling arrest from a few weeks ago? Was he home at the time? I know there were reports at the time you said that he was incarcerated. The individual that was arrested and charged, I guess, was he home? Was there an altercation between these two individuals?
Based on the fact that it's been indicted and it's now going to be in court, I probably am not going to comment any further on it.
Was he an individual that was on the radar considering he had previous interactions with law enforcement?
The gentleman that was arrested?
Yes.
I honestly do not know. I just know he was one of the owners of the dogs.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can folks pose for a picture? I like to get my pictures. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mayor.